Here.
Hey everybody, please remember to subscribe, like, and share. I hope you all enjoyed the video.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to my little spot here on the C Show. You got your host Chris here coming at you from an undisclosed location here in Alabama, and I've got a JFK researcher, student. I don't know how you describe yourself. With me today. Known him for a pretty good while on several groups. He goes sometimes. Don't take it personal, like a little joke. He'll frustrate me because he goes back and forth on his beliefs, but I think we all have done in time from time. But I had him on a while back and lost the recording, but it was great, and I wanted to talk to him again. But anyway, how are you, Stephen? And thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, Steve Smith or Stephen Smith. Yeah, I'm doing good. I've got a big sinus problem and had a lot of trouble sleeping last night, so it's not my best day. But hey, I'm up and taking nourishment, so whatever,
But where are you from, Steve? Or you Steve or Stephen? What do you prefer to go by?
either way is fine, Steven. I'm from Southwest Missouri, Joplin, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri. Anybody been down that area, they would know where that is.
Okay.
Right on I-44 as you're heading right. Like Oklahoma, I could drive to Oklahoma in about 20 minutes. I could be in Kansas in about 10. Be in Arkansas, it would take me about an hour maybe to get to Arkansas.
That's pretty good. You could be. There's a lot of different places there in that location.
Yeah. You can get out of town quickly.
Where I'm at in Birmingham, I don't know if you've ever been there, but you jump on the interstate down there. You're 2 hours from Atlanta, 2 hours from Nashville. You can be on the beach in 4 hours. You can be in New Orleans in 5. So it's a pretty good central location for us traveling too.
Yeah.
So what got you involved in the Kansas assassination? How old was you? Had you been born yet when the president was killed, or do you remember?
I was in the 3rd grade. I was 8.
Okay.
I remember it, as far as the day that it happened and all that, and that weekend. I remember, I won't say I have a photographic memory of it, but, I remember it quite well, and, what happened then afterward, as Johnson was taking over, there was a big feeling like, oh, Johnson, whoa, this is so different. But, I think it was even Oswald who told the cops that, what good would it do me to kill the president? There'll just be a new president and the country goes on. Well, he was right on that. We do have a transfer of power that's very effective. And, as long as they both don't die. And then I guess even then it would jump down to the Speaker of the House would be we have a line of succession. So, but it was a very weird experience, very strange time in America's history, and very memorable, I think, for that reason.
That's a very interesting statement you said. I've never heard that attributed to Oswald, saying that. As a small child, and I know at 8 people still have are coming into understanding things.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you thought or what was going through your mind? The president's been killed. I mean, was it just?
Well, initially, they didn't run right in at 1:30 and tell us that he was dead. They waited like a couple of hours, but even then, the shock is the same. And there was a little bit of denial. We were in class, and then it was almost time for school to let out. It let out at 3:30 or 20 till 4. And who did it? And I don't know, but what they had the name Lee Harvey Oswald in the media, and people were talking about it as early as 3:30. If it wasn't at 3:30, it was by the time a little after I got home. But I mean, news was moving pretty fast then, because I'm a news reporter for a radio group right now. And you would think that things were moving really slow in 1963, but they did move slower and it was clunkier. But that news got out very quickly about the description. And once they took him into custody, I think he was in custody within a couple of hours, and a little over that maybe. And but what we thought was, it was a shock. And I remember I walked home and it was a really cloudy day. It wasn't raining, but the clouds were really low in the sky. And on the way home, I was thinking, I guess they didn't tell us about that, because I was thinking, gee, could the guy that killed Kennedy be on the loose and come up and kill me? I mean, I wasn't really afraid of that, but I was thinking, where is this person right now?
Yeah. Well, sure.
And by that time, I could see my house a few blocks away because I lived very close to the school. But it was a time of, where, it's just one of those things when someone dies close to you suddenly. It's always a massive shock. And it was, by the time, with seeing TV and all, JFK was somewhat close. Just, I mean, in the sense that, the president, if it, now Trump or Biden, I mean, it was a distinct shock. And then everything that transpired that afternoon and evening and the next 2 days and then the funeral, it was just really, it was bizarre.
Well,
And
let me ask you a couple questions before it's
Sure.
kind of getting off topic, but I want to go back onto that. But you said a couple things that caught my interest that I wanted to ask your opinion on. Do you think that the way Oswald was treated, and I'm not saying he was mistreated by the Dallas police, but the way he was treated, being paraded around almost like a cattle at an auction in front of the media. Do you feel like his rights were violated?
Well, let me preface that by saying that, but for about 2 week period 2 years ago, I've had pretty much the same feeling about the assassination as far as where I stand for quite a few years. And I don't know what happened in that 2 week period, but everybody has a bad day or a good day, which you might see. But I think a lot of people are inclined, and by what I write, which is not personally confusing or attempted intentionally confusing. But I do not consider myself we divide these people into LNs, which I guess should be LG, lone nutter or lone gunman, or conspiracy theorist. Well, as far as what happened up to the moment that John Kennedy was killed, I do not consider myself to be an LN or a CT. I consider myself to be undecided. Now, afterward, and we can talk about this later, afterward, I do believe there was a conspiracy after John Kennedy died. So I think that confuses people. But let's get back to your question, which was, did I think that Oswald's rights were violated? And I think you have to be contextual. You have to look at it from 1963, the way things were handled. But in my short one-word answer, if I had to say one or the other, is yes. I think it's were violated to a degree.
That's an
Yeah.
excellent answer. Because I've tried to explain people in other groups, especially my Civil War group, when I talk to people, and they say this, and I'm like, the problem is we have today as a society, we try to look at an event in, 1890 through 2021 eyes, and you just cannot do that.
No, you can't.
Yeah,
So
it's just possible. The other question I had before we got into this, do you feel that had President Kennedy been Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Ronald Reagan or a 78-year-old man, just an old man, with grown kids, as opposed to a young, handsome, charismatic man with a beautiful wife, small children, just the epitome of what maybe an American family was, a hope for a future. Do you think that has more to do with the myth or legend of the assassination as opposed had it been to it as an older man?
Well, I think, you know, it's dangerous to give the short answer, but the short answer, you know, when I was growing up, which was in 1963, I was 8, most of our dads had been in either World War II or Korea.
Mhm.
And they came home. A lot of them were on the GI Bill, had families, and it was a really prosperous, although there were a lot of poor people, a lot more poor people than just a few years later. It was a really prosperous time of growing a lot of kids, the baby boom. But again, the short answer on that would have to be yes. I think that anybody cut down in their prime, you know, like Princess Diana, or I don't know who else would fit the bill, you know, exactly. One could say everybody thinks Elvis was old when he died, but he was only 42. You know,
It is
John
43.
was 40. So they were both younger than, all three of those people were younger than JFK.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I think it would be undeniable that had he had a long career and all that, it would have still been a massive blow. But you know,
Right.
yeah, I think so. Yes, sure.
Yeah, I believe that too because it was new, it was fresh. You got this good looking couple up there, and yeah, I think that definitely had something to do with it. So let's go back to that day. You're young kid walking home, uh, and maybe this is an unfair question, but when you're finding out about it, are you thinking, okay, Lee Harvey Oswald, did it, or are you like a lot of 8-year-olds, your mind's racing, thinking, who could have did this? Was somebody else involved? The Russians do it. I mean, what was Stephen thinking that Saturday when Oswald was being interrogated?
Well, you know, by Friday mid
Excuse me,
afternoon,
Friday. I'm sorry, Friday.
yeah, by Friday mid afternoon or early after or very early evening, but really it was still in the afternoon. The name, like, one thing I've never been able to understand is when Oswald was shot, that radio reporter down there in Dallas, and everybody knows his name but me. I can't recall it right now, but he said, Lee Harold Oswald has been shot. Lee Harold Oswald has been shot. And because he was told by somebody, well, his name's actually Harold. But believe me, by about 4:30 that afternoon, the name Lee Harvey Oswald was impregnated permanently like a branding iron in everybody's brain. How that guy could have made that mistake, if it was a mistake, I know he says it wasn't, but I mean, everybody heard that name. And by early evening, you know, I'm not saying that everybody was thinking he's guilty, he did it, but everybody had heard that name. Now, as far as the Russians and all that, no, that didn't come to my mind back then. I mean, I wasn't sophisticated enough to as any child probably wasn't, to draw a bunch of lines, but I'm sure it came to a lot of other minds, but adult minds, but that the name Oswald, and I remember thinking, I don't want to say it's an ugly name, but it's a strident name. It's like when you scrape your fingers against a blackboard. There are the
Mhm.
strong L sound, Oswald. It's not a common name that you hear every day, but it was just one of those things that, from the moment you heard it, you couldn't forget it, and the two, it was right there. But no, I mean, we knew that he had been taken into custody and that they had a guy arrested, but that's really all.
So, did you watch, the uh, TV that day and watch, him being transferred and talking? Did your parents allowed you to watch that, or was you kind of sheltered from what was going on?
No, we watched it.
Uh, so
we,
we, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
we watched it. And in fact, we didn't go to church on Sunday so we could
Mhm.
see the transfer. And of course, it was happened later than when church started, which I don't know. Maybe that 10 o'clock time had already been talked about, which it didn't happen at 10 o'clock, of course. But you know, because church started at 10, as I recall. Well, actually, well, it doesn't matter anyway. But anyway, uh, as I recall, we were watching the network on which he was on. It only ran live on one network, but I remember we were waiting and they brought him out there, and the gun went off, and I remember my dad was really really infuriated. He felt that, his exact words were, and I'm not saying because he said it, it's true, but his exact words were, and this is right after Oswald was shot, within maybe 20 minutes. Oh, they shot him to shut him up, you know. And I think a lot of Americans felt that way. I mean,
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
how could he be? Our question was, how could he be shot in the basement of a police department surrounded by police? And of course, we could go on and on about that question, but
Yeah.
yeah, that was the second real, just I don't know,
Yeah.
unusual and crazy thing that went on. And then after that, at that point, I truly believe that's when the whole controversy over the assassination began.
I agree with you on that. Had the car, Oswald not asked for the sweater, the agent not came in and questioned one time. They moved him at 10, and Oswald went on for a trial. There never we wouldn't be. I mean, you wouldn't be having this conversation
No,
today.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
And you may not have been old enough to really understand this. What was your first impression when you heard "I'm just a patsy"?
Well, we heard that, and that was when you're in communications and advertising and PR, as I've been later in my life, I'm also a unsuccessful songwriter, and
I didn't know that.
yeah, and I had a guy we talked to, took some a tape, if you want to call it. Well, it was a tape. It was a reel-to-reel tape back, and to Shelter Records, and had a long talk with this guy. His name was Simon Miller Mundy, and he worked for Shelter, which was owned by Leon Russell in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This was years after that, but he said, "You've got to understand, guys, that you've got to have a hook. You've got to have a hook." And I thought, that is so true. And that line, I'm a patsy, or I'm just a patsy. That's a hook. It's hard to forget that line. I don't know what I thought. I can't recall what my impression was. Probably you read so much, but it certainly is a line that stuck with you. I mean, and it's
I've heard.
curious. It's a curious thing for him to have said too, I think.
Well,
Because,
I've heard. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just sorry to interrupt. I think he.
No, I interrupted you. It was my fault.
Oh well, okay, whatever. One of us is guilty on that, but he when he said that, I think now that was a curious thing to say, because you'd say, like, I can see him saying I didn't do it, or I'm innocent, but I'm just a patsy, or I'm a patsy. I can't remember his exact words. Is an interesting way of wording it. And what does that mean? Was he referring to the fact that, well, they just picked me out because I've lived in the Soviet Union and am a Marxist? I think that might be an answer right there. Or was it, I'm a patsy, somebody up above is making me take the blame, and I know who that someone is, and we don't know any of the answers to these questions, But it was a weird thing to.
That was going to be my statement that I was going to make. Is I've heard some of my long gunman friends say that he made that statement, "I'm just a patsy," because they picked me up because I've lived in the Soviet Union. Which, if that is why he made that statement, that still seems like a weird way to say that's why he was taken in. Does that make sense? They've taken me in for, I'm a patsy because they've taken me in because I've lived in the Soviet Union. That just seems like a weird way to put it.
You really, though, if you project your mind back, and of course I can't see it from 63, but even like 73, I graduated from high school in 73. Even then, the fear of communism was over. That was really, it wasn't post-Vietnam, but it was after we had actually moved out. But the whole Vietnam War was based on the fear of communism. And, if we don't fight them here, we're going to fight them there, and we're going to fight them, and the whole Cuba situation was really, I mean, Cuba, now maybe the Soviet Union did, but Cuba didn't pose any threat to us, doesn't pose any threat to us today, but we still have an embargo against them, and
I can understand what you mean, because me being born in '76, even up until the late '80s in the fall. We still, growing up, I was still scared to death of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union.
It was really after they tore down that wall, and a few years then that began to kind of like, as far as our consciousness and our fear. But when I was in the first and second grade, we would have, and I know this sounds crazy, we would have nuclear bomb drills and school, and we would all get down under our desks. And they did away with that when I was in the second grade, which that would have been 1962, but which is silly. And even we would turn to each other and say, if they drop a nuclear bomb on this little town in Missouri, which of course they wouldn't do, we're all going to be fried anyway, or something like that. We all already knew that and why they were having that. And they even called them, like nuclear bomb drills or something like that, nuclear explosion. But
Yeah, my dad was a few years older than you. He would be, I think, 71 this year, and he told me the same thing about how they would have him get up under the desk
Yep.
for that. And when he was telling me that when I was a little kid, and I was thinking, well, how's that going to save you?
It ain't, basically. And
Um,
we were saying that to each other, but I guess the teachers had to do it because I wish they hadn't called them that, but from a conventional war, yeah, I can see it, because you could keep you from, and maybe it would have worked if the ceiling would have collapsed and all that, but but the fear of communism and everything that communism embodied from the early 50s and the McCarthy era continued on for another 20, 25 years now, in great form, less form, and all that. But really, I think that that had to be, that was probably a factor. And when Oswald came back, just the fact that he was a Marxist or a communist. In fact, one of his employers, it was at the photo place that he'd worked at, made the comment. It wasn't the actual person that was in charge of him that, he, they didn't like him just because he read a newspaper in Russian, which if I could read a newspaper in Russian, that would be quite an accomplishment, I might add. But
I actually tried to teach myself Russian a while back because I thought it was an interesting language, and I didn't spend much time on it because the words, there was no way I could be able to learn that.
yeah, I
So I
remember the
interrupt you.
alphabet, and it was be, and yeah, go, or something like that. And it's, yeah, because it has a totally different alphabet. Now the funny thing is, once you learn that Cyrillic alphabet, then you can sound out a word. Because that's part of the goal, part of the challenge right there.
And I've been wanting to learn some different languages, so maybe you just gave me a good point. Maybe I should learn the alphabet first, and then start trying to learn the actual languages.
And another thing that's funny about the alphabet, and I'm sparking off, but Lee Oswald had a terrible dyslexia problem in English, but I've read that what he wrote in Russian was right on. That
really?
He well accomplished, but it didn't show any evidence of dyslexia. So do you just have dyslexia in one language and not in another, and maybe so, I don't know, but
And I wonder if that's something that can be developed too, because when I was a child, I had excellent writing, never misspelled words. But now as I've gotten older, it's like I have dyslexia. But I digress. We kind of went off our original thing here.
Right. Yeah.
So let's go back. So
Okay.
The Warren Commission comes out, and you're still what, 8, 9 years, 10 years old then.
By then I was still probably just 9 when because they cranked that out pretty quickly, by the end of later in 64.
So when did you, and I don't know, when did you start studying it, reading, books, periodicals, journals?
Well, there was a book, I believe it was The Day Kennedy Was Shot, and I want to say that was by Jim Bishop. And it was one of the first ones that came out. And I read that one, and I don't know what year it came out. But obviously, probably wasn't the first, but it was a long book about. And I believe he interviewed Jackie Kennedy personally, And there was another book that came out right around that time too. But you know, I read those books. I was still in elementary, or at least later elementary school when that happened. I'd have to check and see when that was published. It was probably later than I think, but it was probably 68 or 69. But you know, uh, and you know, it gave you a blow by blow everything that Kennedy did and how he came in, and then you know, and I don't know how far it went, but and it was a for that time it was a good book. It was got really quite an accomplishment. It's a big thick book.
Did that book start you on, I don't want to say being a conspiracy theorist, but questioning the official narrative?
Well, I don't know if it. No, I can't go that far to say it made me question the official narrative, but I know in some of the early things that were written, Oswald was portrayed, or they tried to portray him as someone who was, and I think it was the writing problem spawned this, who simply wasn't very bright. And well, you know, I don't believe that. Now, he may not
Oh,
have been very
the man
sane.
was smart.
Yeah, I mean, but he was very a natural, uh, very bright young man. You know, I mean, he
Yes, yes,
died
he
at
was
4.
intelligent.
So I that those that type of viciousness didn't add up with learning to speak Russian and all that, and I think I perceived that pretty early on. But I don't know if it began that early. You know, um,
What about
over the
some of the other books you've or people you studied? I mean, Weisberg, Lane. Did you follow any of these guys? I would ask you about Jim Mars, but I just don't have much credibility in a lot of
yeah,
him.
yeah, you know, and the other one about JFK and the unspeakable,
Oh God,
unthinkable,
that's what.
unthinkable.
Yes,
Yeah, that one. That you know, I read that quite a few years. That goes back now for several years.
I got
But
that for one of my birthdays, and I was like, "Oh my God, this book is." Uh, I, I was not impressed.
yeah, all those books are obviously covering the same events. You know,
Exactly.
they're looking through uh, uh, different lenses sometimes, and sometimes very different lenses. Um, there are obviously some conspiracy theory people that you know are you know have to are working really hard to prove something that is based on you know on very little. And then there are some you know, and that's usually pretty obvious, you know, I think. But I also think on the other side, you know, I think the lone nutter explanation isn't based on, you know, well, that's based on hard evidence. Well, it's based on hard evidence, but there are some questions about that hard evidence, you know, as far as the whole traditional, you know, Oswald did it without any help. And I do believe, and let me make this clear, I think there is a chance that Oswald did it without any help. But I don't know that. You know, I will not say that that's what happened because I don't know if that's true. But I think it is theoretically possible up to the point when Kennedy died that Oswald might have done it by himself. But, or, you know, or not, you know.
Uh,
But, you know, and as I said, you know, there's the up to the moment that the president died, and then there's after he died. And then after he died, as I said, I am a conspiracy theorist because I do believe that people in government and various individuals in government got together and decided that they didn't want this to go any farther and it was all going to be Oswald and that was it, you know. And that way, and I think they may have done that for some reasonable uh, uh, for reasonable purposes and fears over uh, our own security for
right,
international
not
security.
nothing necessarily nefarious, but something that
Not
you know.
necessarily, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
I understand. I agree with that.
I think secondly they did that for that reason. You know, in other words, the Dallas Police Department early on kept banging the communist drum. And Mr. Hoover and others that were in the now Johnson administration, but really in those offices that, they were all still the people that were there before, they didn't want that to be the explanation that communism had anything to do with it, because they didn't want that link between Oswald and either Cuba or the Soviet Union, because, again, what we just said,
nuclear war.
Yes, it could have. I mean, we were only a year-ish past, a really big problem that nearly caused a nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, you tell me, if they would prove that the Russians had killed our president, I think for sure we would have went to almost. It would have been an annihilation. I believe that.
And that they probably knew that too. Now, then the next question is, did the Russians have anything to do with it? And I think that question is, I don't know. My guess is no, but I'm not 100% sure. But we do know, or we're pretty sure, some people say didn't, that Oswald went to Mexico City.
Yeah, I want to touch on that too.
Visited those embassies. Everybody who walked in that embassy was photographed by the Americans, except one person.
Right.
And that person just happened to be Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, my guess is those pictures were suppressed because we didn't want to have a picture of him walking in there, because every little bit more evidence that says, well, there he goes. And of course, he talked to a guy that was in charge of the assassinations, at the Soviet embassy. And,
right.
So I think that, if there had been some connection, even a vague connection, I don't think that I do think there was a conspiracy to not let the American people know that. And I think that conspiracy continues to this day.
I want to get back to some of those things in just 1 second. There were some things
Sure.
that you had mentioned when you said that you can believe that Oswald did it alone, had nobody help him, and he carried it out, and you can accept that. Yeah, theoretically. I can. I went from being a hardcore conspiracist to now somebody who is a fence sitter. I believe that Oswald was the shooter, him and Tippit, but I don't. But there's things that I cannot ignore,
such
as he goes to Russia, defects, marries Marina, comes back into the country. He one of the big things that people come up with excuses. Will give me this. When he went home and got his pistol, where was he headed? Was he just going to walk around South Dallas all day until he got picked up? Some of the people, even it was just him that was starting it. His fair play for Cuba committee. I know he was the only one that was in it. There's just some things that I just can't ignore. And then going into what I was wanting to touch on, the New Mexico City trip where he went down there. They have him on the phone threatening to kill Kennedy. He met with the head of the assassinations team. This is not something that ordinary Americans go down there and talk to people about.
Well, they don't really have him recording that has ever been released of him on the phone. That's been said that he said that, but we don't know that he said that. But it was reported that he said that. Yeah.
And then the fake statement that you made about the fake picture of Oswald. Hoover was in, and this here goes to show me how far they'd been looking at this guy, Tracy, whatever. Hoover was in Johnson's office the next day, and he was telling Johnson that he believed Oswald was being impersonated. And there's a statement, and I want to know what it means. They said that Johnson talked Hoover or Johnson talked Warren into heading the Warren Commission after what Hoover told him about a little incident in Mexico City. Well, what was that little incident? I mean, what
Well,
took place there?
I was wondering that too because I thought, was he? And then supposedly, Warren cried, and but Johnson insisted that he had it. And I thought, were they talking about something that Warren did in Mexico City, or are they talking about the little incident of Oswald going to Mexico City? And I've never quite understood that either. It sounded to me like Johnson was quite a guy in many different ways,
Yes.
and it sounded almost bullied Earl Warren into becoming the head of that commission. But he was Johnson was a different type of cat, that's for sure. I
I
mean,
mean, I want to know what that little incident, was.
I've
So,
read that and wondered the same. Mhm.
and then we go along here, and time goes by, and I'm not a grand conspiracy guy. Like I said, I believe Oswald could have been influenced. Hey, take this shot, get to this location. Like when I said where he was going, could have been the library meeting point. We'll pick you up, get you out there to Redbird Field, fly you out of the country. You'll be a hero. Something happened with Tippett, and maybe Plan B was at the theater. And I'm just speculating now, but letting my conspiracy mind go. It could have just been like Oswald panicked and got out of there. Um, that was just something that I couldn't ignore. But the things that then I go back to, Oswald was an admirer of Kennedy. He said that. So would his motive be to take out the head of capitalism, him being a communist?
Well, Oswald did some writing about, um, for his friend in the Marine Corps, Kerry Thornley, wrote a novel but long before the Kennedy assassination, not long, but years, in which his lead character was based on Lee Harvey Oswald. This is before anybody knew who Lee Harvey Oswald was.
Really, that's interesting.
He was so impressed by Oswald that he made him the lead character of his novel. And if I hadn't been trying, I could have told you what the name of that novel was. But oopsie. Anyway, but I thought that was really interesting that that man would write a novel and base Oswald. And when he finished the novel, he had just read that Oswald had defected, and then he used that in the novel too. And of course, his character wasn't named Oswald, but his contention was Kerry Thornley in that novel, which is a novel that America had let Oswald down, and that our high-mindedness was not high-minded enough. And Oswald, in his writings, which were completely different, and of course they were pretty disjointed, but he said that he didn't think that communism was the answer, and he didn't think capitalism was the answer, that he was trying to go for something different. And he kind of described something like what he wanted to see happen, which was not very well defined. But I guess your real
I'm
question
sorry.
though is why did he do it? Why
Yeah.
did he do it? What made
And I
him?
want to give
Who
you,
made him? And that's the question that even if we blame it all on Oswald's mentality, we can't dig deep enough into the human mind to fully understand that. Was
I'm,
it? You know,
I'm, I'm going to give you a theory,
okay.
and people have said I'm crazy. That they, that makes no sense. That would have happened. No, and perhaps it is. But I thought about this a lot, and I've played it over in my mind. And I believe that from what I've read about his psyche and his mentality and about having control, that when he went to see Marina to try to reconcile with her that night, and the day he left, and he gave his ring, and he invited Marina and the Roos or the Paynes to come out to the motorcade. I believe somewhere in his psyche he left his money in his ring, and in his mind he thought, if I can't have my family back, um, I'm going to destroy all of our families.
That's a possibility. Another thought would be that, Oswald's father died. He had no recollection of him. His mother was, let's face it, not playing with a full deck.
Oh no.
At one point, I read that they moved. Moves are traumatic for young kids.
Yes, especially 12, 13 years old. Yes.
And I think they moved over 20 times. At one point, she got up either from New Orleans or the Dallas area and just moved to New York City.
Right. Yes, I think that's when he put a knife at her, correct?
And, well, that was later on. Actually, that was his his sister-in-law, I guess.
Okay.
But when he got there, all the kids laughed at him because he talked like he was from New Orleans, and had a strong accent. And at one point, he started cutting class and would just ride the subway or ride the trains for 13 or 14 hours a day, and then come home as if he had been. And he was like, an adolescent, 12, 13 years old. And, you could see one theory that might reinforce the lone gunman thing is that, was Kennedy the image of either the father he didn't have, or was he taking vengeance for the crappy life that he'd been fostered upon him? Of course, a lot of kids have suffered equally crappy lives and have gone on to, do good and great things. But or was he that crazy? Marina didn't think that he had done it when she heard about it. Ruth Payne didn't think he had done it. Robert Oswald was kind of on the fence, right at the beginning. I believe lots of people just thought, like, what? This is outlandish. He wouldn't do something like that. So again, when you really try to get down to the answer of why, we don't know, and we're not going to know.
Yeah, and we never will, because I hear, to be famous, to make his mark, to do this, and I don't really think we know, like I said, what's going on in the mind of a, killer at that point. I mean, he had every opportunity to, like, just make it real quick. He comes in, they've taken me in because I've lived in that building. No, I didn't shoot anybody. And then 11 hours later, I simply don't know what this situation is about. Nobody's told me anything. Well, you've just been interrogated for 11 hours. I'm sure you know what is going on. So back to Oswald. Was he, or do you believe he worked for the CIA, or was he a FBI agent?
I don't know if he worked for the CIA, but I think that there is a plausible. Now, I don't have any proof. John Newman wrote, his book about Oswald, and gave some pretty good hints. And he didn't really come out. He didn't, on one side or another, but about pointing out the very strange way that Oswald was treated when he left America and when he came back to America. Was he, and there actually was a program where we were sending people over there to defect.
Right.
I mean, we know that, and they were mostly young people, a lot of them ex-service people who would go over and do exactly what Oswald did. So was he a part of that? Would he have been a part of it? I think it's plausible, but again, we don't know. And if we did know, if we knew that, we could draw some other conclusions, but we're not going to know that, because I'm sure that post-assassination conspiracy would have considered that something that they weren't going to talk about. I mean, you just don't talk about those things.
Well, I know in the Warren Commission, there is I think it was Beelan asked him, maybe it was Richard Helmsley, I can't remember. or maybe it was McCollum, did Oswald work for the CIA? They flip over and the next page is gone.
Yeah, yeah. And if you read the HSCA Marina Oswald testimony, she says they didn't have an argument. She says that there was no argument that night. That yeah, they had a discussion over those things, and she asked him, made it clear that she wanted to have a washer, and all that. And Oswald said, okay, well, that's even in the Warren Commission too. That he said, oh, all right, you can have the washing machine. He caved, and he left all that money. Well, all that money would have more than paid for a washing machine. Uh, I've
So
often
that
wondered,
could just be on the backstory right there of making it okay.
or Marina made up a completely different story, which Marina was not very consistent in a lot of things that she said, but in the HSCA, she comes out and basically it was all sweetness and light, but again, they had lived under that situation. And she said, well, they did plan on getting an apartment, after the first of the year. They were going to be there through the holidays, and then, then they were going to go back out on their own. And, so, I mean, that could really dash that whole theory. And of course, he did say he was going to buy her a washer. He left a lot of money, plausibly, for a washer, as if to say, here you go, and I mean, we don't know that either, that
Well,
was
the one thing that gets me though is in Russian culture, leaving your wedding behind is very significant.
well, even in our culture, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true.
Yeah.
When we was talking about the books a while ago, when was it, and you may have actually started, when was it that you maybe started going, hey, there is a conspiracy? Was it after you read those books that we talked about? That you
I think
mentioned?
it was again, I'm not saying that there was a conspiracy.
Well, just
Well, wait a
maybe
minute, let me finish
having
that
doubts.
sentence, though. I got to finish the sentence, or
Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
not
I'm
saying
sorry.
that there was a conspiracy
Don't.
to kill JFK for sure. I don't know, but as far as the post-assassination conspiracy, I would say, certainly within the last 20 years, it's just been a slow drip of things that, make it very clear that, I think that the United States, there are two things going on here. One was that national security concern, those national security concerns that we just don't want to mention it. We don't want a nuclear war. That's one thing. Then, of course, Lamar Waldron and others have written that we were planning on a sort of a semi benign, but not so benign invasion of Cuba that was going to take place when Castro was killed, and the target date for that was around December 1st, 1963.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. The person in charge of the meetings the two were, it was primarily Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, and with meeting with the CIA and other interested parties. And the president was there from time to time too, although they kept to sort of a, what was it they called it, plausible deniability. That's a Reagan administration term. But
I love that.
he and that date would have been, of course, obviously, it's only about a week or 10 days after JFK was killed. But that our planning for that included the CIA working with members of the mob, and what would America have thought if they had realized that our government was working with the cutthroats and killers and the mob, the very same people that Bobby and Jack Kennedy had been pronouncing that they were going to take off the streets and arrest, in other forums, that actually we were working with them on a plan to free, quote, quote, Cuba. Of course, Chris, the mob had a lot to win because they had owned, as you know, I'm sure, the gambling halls in Cuba, and Castro
Oh
kicked
yeah,
them
they
out.
were set to make a lot of money. Yeah,
And
a lot more.
it was not just the gambling; it was the gambling, the prostitution, uh, the gun
Drugs.
trades, and all that, and the drugs. I'm sure were involved, and those things cost them untold millions of dollars. So the mob had a a good reason to want to get back into Cuba. Now let's talk about the CIA. The CIA was overseen after by the Kennedy administration by Allen Dulles. Well, the Dulles brothers, of course, John Foster Dulles committed suicide, so the Dulles family or Allen Dulles owned United Fruit, and United Fruit was sort of like the Dole pineapple. I mean, they got all the bananas and all that stuff, and paid the Cuban people nothing. They paid a quarter a day or whatever it was to do that, and had this huge fruit. I won't say monopoly, but something like that. Well, Castro also kicked them out, because he said, you're taking these people, you're paying them nothing, and so we'll just manage our own fruit, And then there are lots of interests, fruit, tobacco is another. I've never seen tobacco connected in any way, but there were lots of business interests too that lost millions and millions, if not billions of dollars when Castro came into power, and may well have been thought they would have been restored if Cuba had developed a quasi-democratic government. So, and now, of course, those are speculative things. There's no proof that Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA. Allen Dulles lost a lot of money, therefore he wanted to do this or that. And I would say that's a lot more true of the mob. but the question is, what would the American people have thought if they knew that we were working with the mob?
That created more distrust in our government than probably anything, knowing that we were working with the mafia.
Now, here's another question. Now, by the time the HSCA, that was beginning to be a known fact that, that we were doing that. And in fact, that's when, around the time of that, people like Johnny Rosselli and
Yep.
The other guy, Sam Giancana, ended up dead.
Yep.
And one Rosselli, I think, was floating in a 50-gallon oil drum, chopped up or something like that. And Giancana had bullets around his mouth, which is the mob sign, squealer. And he had actually, I believe, testified too, and in secret, I think. And so you've got another question of that comes to mind, then about the mob and what did they know. But what I'm getting to is, and it's not pleasurable to mention this because I know that most of the people that follow the assassination are big JFK fans. I am too. But John F. Kennedy was sleeping in the White House with Judith Campbell, who had been the sex partner and mole, M-O-L-L, mob mole, of both Giancana and Rosselli. And,
I had no idea. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, well, Martin Kelly and I had a discussion about it, and he disagreed with me. And actually, to his credit, he checked into it and found out that she had signed into the White House
And
law.
Martin will, Martin will always come back and admit that I found that my deals with.
And that's what he did, as I say, to his credit. But what the hell was the president of the United States doing, sleeping with that girl, and didn't quit doing it until J. Edgar Hoover met with him and told him, you need to break it off. How
One thing.
how
sorry.
how irresponsible, how dangerous, how opening himself up to blackmail, and that was just one of, I could go on and on and on that subject of the president's, I think what they would call that now is a sex addiction,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of problems there. What would the American people have thought if a free and open investigation, which the Warren Commission wasn't, had started revealing these things? Because believe me, after President Kennedy died, he was virtually, for about 10 years, almost like a god. People had plates.
I think to a certain extent, he still is in some.
I agree.
Older people, yes.
Yeah.
Because
I think he was a great man. But
Yeah,
he was playing a very dangerous
yeah,
game.
yeah. Because one thing, two things I want to say real quick. Uh, Lyndon Johnson, did more for the black community, than Kennedy actually did. And like Johnson said that always bothered him that, Kennedy got credit for, the bills that he passed. And, he said, that really bothered him. Um, the other thing I wanted to say real quick, and I never understood this, and maybe you know the answer. The mob put the Kennedys in office, or at least helped. And then why do you turn on them? I could never understood why Bobby Kennedy turned on them after they delivered Chicago.
Well, yeah, they delivered some precincts in Illinois, and uh, so they say, and I think that's true. And I don't know. I think he was already, even in the Senate prior to the election, he was on a campaign against organized crime. And of course, J. Edgar Hoover, if you go back to, he had a newsletter. If you look at that newsletter in the 1950s, I think even very early 60s, very, very early, claimed that there was no organized crime in the United States of America, which we know is absolutely ridiculous, and why he would make such an outlandish claim. I don't know why. Some said Mr. Hoover was being blackmailed too because of his sexual preferences and all that. And we know that the United States government worked with the mob in the 1940s during World War II and were kind of semi held hostage. It was all about them protecting the waterfront from.
You said something funny there, and
What's that?
I wanted to touch on this. I mean, and by no means am I trying to. I don't want the listeners think I'm anti-gay people or anti-homophobia or having
Yeah.
will. But a friend of mine, he's in his 70s now, and he said his mother worked for the FBI in the 40s because all the men was off to work and they had to have a job. And she was talking about how in 1941 it was common knowledge that Hoover was a homosexual and dressed as a woman, and dressed in drag. And I thought, how the hell did he keep that secret for the next for the next 30 years? I mean, it just it baffled me how he kept that
Well,
quiet.
I think that a lot of these things weren't kept secret. They were kept secret from, like people like you and me now and families and all that. But there were people in Washington who knew that. And, John Kennedy's nickname, I think when he was in the Senate, was Bedroom Jack, because everybody knew that he liked lots of different women. And, I mean, but it wasn't, the media didn't churn it out, and they didn't put everything out in front of everybody like maybe they would have now. And of course, I guess a guy has a right to, like you said, I know you admitted to, and I think you probably agreed, got right to be gay, and I guess maybe you're right to dress in drag. But even today, that probably wouldn't go down all that well among
No, I
certain
couldn't
areas
see
of the
that
country.
happening. I mean, because and sorry to get off on a tangent again. Like I believe if Mayor Pete had been had not been homosexual, that he would have walked to the Democratic nomination. I mean, you've got a good-looking, charismatic, war veteran up there. I think that
Kennedy, like, yeah,
yeah,
kind of like.
I could. What I said was, I said he was a Kennedy, Clinton, Obama, once in a generation type candidate, and I just think it was there. But okay, so let's go back for a minute here. November 22nd, 1963. Oswald gets up and goes to the Payne's house, and I know this is your favorite subject. He has a package. Tell me about that package.
Well, I don't know this. I haven't been. Well, I've been in Dallas, but I've never been to the Payne's house. But I was reading that the house that Frazier
I meant to actually
was
say
in was
I
only.
meant to actually. Well, that's what I meant to say. Was actually Bull's house, but yeah, go to the Payne. But you can start with the Paynes or the Frasers or however. Just
I've read that those two houses are only a few hundred yards apart. I don't know if that's true or not, but
really.
yeah. And in fact, I read that not long ago. I don't know how many, but within sight of each other. Which I've never really thought about that to actually plot out where Lenny Mae, what was her last name? Randall lived, But what are my thoughts about the whole subject? Well, I'll tell you what, I think it's one of the most curious parts of a curious story. That you have a man that drove his sort of like friend to work that day. And the friend, first of all, the first thing is there are two aspects of it. As far as the package, Buell Frazier says, oh, yeah, he had a package, but it was only about 2 feet or maybe a couple inches longer. And I had the opportunity last year, I guess it was last year, maybe it was earlier this year, to speak to Buell Frazier. And I said, have you ever thought about, like saying like maybe, well, I think I was right. He goes, no. He goes, I haven't ever had that. No. He goes, that's how long it was. I mean, he was as firm as anything in believing that it was only a little over 2 feet wide. That was it. I mean, he was 100% sure of it. Or that was my impression. And but I think it's very interesting. So here we have, if Buell's story had been, well, it looked like it was 2 feet wide, but oh hell, I don't know, maybe it was 3 or 3.5. Then it would all line up. But you've got this one guy there who says no. And at one point in one of the discussions at the 6th floor, Buell comes out and someone says something about the rifle. And he says, and I remember his response was, that's because there was no rifle. I mean, he is absolutely sure it was only 2 feet and a little more across. And we know it could
But
not
that
have
would
been
beg my
anything.
question: how would Buell know that was not in there?
Well, he wouldn't know what was in it, but he knows that by his unshakable belief of how long it was, that we know that even if the rifle had been broken down, it couldn't have been 2 feet and a few more inches. It would have had to have been several more inches wide than that. And so
But don't you think
therefore,
he could have just made, because, I know how I am. If I see a package and I glance and I'm like, that's about 2 feet long, and it ended up being, 31 inches long. Do you think it's
well,
possible he just could have made a mistake?
well, I asked him. That's what I said. Have you ever thought that maybe, maybe it was a few inches long? Have you really gone back on your belief that it was 2 feet, a few inches longer? And his immediately answered, no, I haven't gone back on that at all. No, not at all. I mean, but what's curious about it is this, Chris. Here is a guy that willingly admits that a man had a package and of the type and maybe the width that could have held, a rifle. But in one story, he simultaneously uh, damns and exonerates Lee Harvey Oswald because, oh yeah, he had that package, but it wasn't long enough to carry a gun. So that is the most fascinating answer to the question I can think of. Was he carrying a gun? Yes. Or was he carrying a package? Yes, he was. Was it a long package, kind of like you put a gun or a rifle in? Yes, it was. How long was it? Oh, it was only 2 feet and a few more inches. So that means, sorry, but it wasn't a gun. So, I think it's a fascinating answer because it takes you right up to the edge of that saying, okay, well, it's a done deal, and then no, it's not a done deal because it wasn't wide enough. So
So,
your question is, well,
yeah.
was he wrong about that?
Well,
Well, that's
uh,
totally, but he doesn't think he was.
so the next question is going to be, well, what was in the package?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know if we know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to it.
Um, do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy?
I'm not sure of it.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of
Okay.
there is a very plausible case to be made that he shot John F. Kennedy.
I'll,
Very
I'll, I'll I like that answer better than when I have somebody say, no, he didn't shoot Kennedy. And then I say, well, okay, who did? And then, I get no
Yeah.
answer, but, I can respect that question right there. Okay. So, let's say for just devil's advocate that he didn't shoot Kennedy, that he was innocent. Why run home, get a pistol, and leave? Does he
Well,
go meet somebody?
that's a good question. People, I know, well, I won't say who it is, but a guy that you wouldn't dream that I hate to describe this person, but
Probably know who you're talking about.
it's kind of like a Mr. Peepers type guy that I know. I mean, a little guy that totally inoffensive, and he's packing a piece all the time. I mean, and or most of the time, he didn't carry it right on him. But I can see Oswald leaving work. I can see him getting his gun, maybe too. But then we have the problem of the Tippit encounter. And that's a totally different. That I don't even want to get on that because it's too broad, and we've probably just about exhausted our time anyway. But
we can save that for another time. We'll just
yeah,
stay on this later. And if you'd like to come back, we can actually do a segment on that one day, because this has been, very interesting so far.
I don't think we could ever get as interesting as the Matt and Bill show on that one, but we try.
Well,
but I really believe
ours is friendly. The Matt and Bill show was, ours is a friendly discussion. That was, I don't know how much you listened to that one, but that was.
Well, I listened to it, and and I don't want to get stir back up the still waters, but honestly, I was impressed with the way that Matt keeps everything in his notebooks and all that. I think that that's really a smart way of doing it, and all that. And I'm also impressed with Bill's fervency and his belief, and some of the points that he makes too. But I just think maybe to sort of start summing up that this is a question that very curiously is still with us. I was 8 when it happened. I'm 66 years old now, and I don't think we know too much. We know quite a bit, actually. Even the Warren Commission produced quite a bit of knowledge, but we haven't come to a final determination. And I don't think that we will, barring some huge pronouncement, revelation, and I think that's probably not going to happen. My guess is 50 years from now that they'll still be writing books about the Kennedy assassination. Um, but my personal belief is that although the case is pretty damning against Oswald, it really isn't proven. I also believe, I'm just going to tick off some of the things I believe. It isn't proven. Number two, I think although the Dallas Police Department did a good job initially, I think that they had two big, huge problems going on. Number one was that they were critically damaged in relationship to this issue. Probably other if this had never happened, it wouldn't have been a thing in their in their relationship with Jack Ruby.
And
I used to go to
prepared for this. I mean, this was like a tsunami. They were not prepared for
this
time.
They weren't prepared at all. No, absolutely not, and not very few would have been. But I used to go to a bar in Joplin. In fact, the reporter Brian Williams used to go there too when he was in Joplin briefly, called the Red Lion, very common bar name in England. And but this was in Missouri. And the police would be there. They would go there at night to hang out and have a few drinks, et cetera, et cetera. But I really think that Jack Ruby was, well, first of all, definitely a complete weirdo, but he really had compromised a lot of the police officers. I don't believe Dave Ledbetter and I were exchanging notes about, at some point said, well, Jesse Curry said it was only like 6 or 12 of the cops that ever went there. Well, I don't know if I believe that or not.
I don't believe that either. Not from what I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard it was
the same
up to
thing.
half.
And from what I've heard,
Go ahead,
the
sir.
whole Dallas Police Department was there, because you're not going to make a statement, "Hey, I'm Jack Ruby, you know me," when there's two cops on top of him.
You're right. Yeah. No, but no, none of you know me. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that I think another estimate was, well, at least half of them were there. Well, that's probably quite a few guys. And, and how many had just stopped in occasionally and all that. But, and what did what did Ruby provide? He provided free drinks, which were illegal, I might add. He probably sandwiches. Did he provide girls? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, this man's job was exploiting women,
Yeah.
so if somebody had said, "Hey, Jack, can you find me a date for the night or the next few hours?" He probably would have come through. I don't want to speculate on that. I think
Oh,
people
I don't think. I think that's a very. I would go along with that.
But that's one big problem that the Dallas Police Department had, because once the door was open to Ruby being able to sashay inside, and he was there Friday night, pretending to be a reporter or a translator, standing up with the reporters, even answering a question or explaining something to the prosecuting attorney. He was there Friday. He was there at the station on Saturday. And of course, who pops up Sunday morning?
You can see him in that picture when they're leading Oswald down the hall. Ruby standing
Yeah.
there.
Who pops up then on Sunday and kills Oswald? And was he casing the joint, or was it all just something that just happened? Well, you can people can believe it's something that just happened, but that kind of, as Patrick Collins would say, beggars belief. I mean, that's hard to believe that he wasn't casing the joint, but he was definitely a scurrilous guy. That if the Dallas Police Department had not had a relationship in that way and had said, "Sorry, sir, you can't come in," at all, on any of those times, then if things might have been different. But might have, you could pay the
Yeah,
go.
they were totally, just, unprepared for it, and I think, to their defense, and it's probably not a good one. From my understanding, the Dallas police wanted him to be seen so they knew he was not being mistreated.
Well, that's what they've said, but I think it's also maybe part of that, and part of they wanted him to be seen because they were showing off. They were basking in the media glory,
Yes, it was like,
and
yeah,
so
just
when they're told twice, called by, I believe, J. Edgar Hoover, at least one of those two times, by the FBI, we've gotten reports that there's going to be a hit tomorrow morning at the transfer. But when they walk him out there, there's nobody in front of him, except news cameras that are getting a good shot, And I'm thinking, how could you be so irresponsible? I mean, now this was before the days of the bulletproof vest, really. They had
right.
them, they didn't work, but they could have put a cordon of cops around, and walked him out that way so you could barely even see him. But no,
Yeah,
they wanted to work with the TV and the reporters and all
and
that.
you're right. They wanted to parade him around like a carnival show.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like that.
the minute he died, or the minute he was shot and ultimately died, then we've got all this complication, because otherwise he would have been tried. And we don't know what would have happened, but he would have been tried. He would have had his legal right, because his right to trial was taken away.
Yeah,
And
because I don't like, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't like when people, uh, glory in the fact that Oswald was killed, because I don't believe in vigilante justice. I believe the man should have had his day in court, and come what may, if he's found guilty, then by all means be executed. But I don't think that the populace should be taking the law in their own hands.
I agree. And we've seen that happen in the United States so many times, where people are hauled out of county courthouses, usually black people, and strung up on the courthouse lawn. In fact, it happened in a city not far from here. It was like 100 years ago, but I mean, it's really the same thing when you deprive a person of the right to have a trial by killing them. I mean, and that's more or less what Ruby did. Now, yeah, maybe he did it because he was just playing crazy, and maybe there was a design, but I don't think that I'll ever be satisfied either way. I mean, And I think that's what another thing that keeps this all going. Who was Jack Ruby? You look into his background; he had all kinds of mob connections. They were low level, but
The CIA. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off again.
that's all right.
I do that. Because people's asked me about things that the Warren Commission got wrong, and I can start naming them. And I'll say, well, one of the first things they said was Ruby had no mob ties, and
Yeah, well, we know that's not true. Yeah.
you can look at the 3 months prior to Kennedy assassination. He was calling, Chicago all the time.
Yeah.
I just got
And
a
then
couple.
they have an answer about that. Oh, he was talking about, what was it about?
Union.
But we don't know what he was talking about, do
Yeah,
we?
you know what we're talking about, but he was calling big time mob figures, and why would they be involved in, some union dispute with some strippers in, Dallas?
Yeah, and as the assassination grew closer, his number of calls went up, increased. Which you
Yes.
would think the mob would be that stupid, just like, hey, don't call us, hey, Jack, please don't call us, but so no, but yeah, that's true.
I got a couple more questions for you because I've kept you on here. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, great.
If Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in a conspiracy, who do you think he would have been involved with? I mean, because we've heard the FBI, mob, Secret Service, FBI, Army intelligence, and we can't keep a secret between that many people. I mean, if you
Well, I disagree with that. I disagree with that conclusion there about we can't keep a secret or nobody can keep a secret like that. I don't know if I agree with that.
between that many organizations,
Yeah, I don't know if I'd agree, because really, probably all those organizations wouldn't have to keep the secret. It would just be, very key ones. There would have been a system going on where probably the people at the top wouldn't have even known the name of the person actually doing the dirty work. I mean, and that way nobody would have, at some point, you would have had to. That's generally the way it's handled. It's not like I guess it could be handled that way where, uh, oh, maybe with the mob, they might have done it that way, but generally you would want to keep the actual names away from the people at the top and just say, well, we have someone who can do this. But the question is, who would he have been? Whom would he have been working, or who would have given that order? And that, I mean, take your pick of, potentials, there. I mean, you could say, well, the mob, CIA, not the CIA as an organization, though. It would have had to have been rogue elements, the CIA, or it could have been, it could have been in connection with that potential invasion, or not invasion, but let's call it that anyway, that Lamar Waldron and others have written about, that to make that not work, to somehow get in the way of that by killing the president. It could have been himself, of course, alone. That not answering the question. Or it could have been anti-Castro Cubans. It could have been pro-Castro Cubans pretending to be anti-Castro Cubans. I mean, again, when you don't know, then that's when pure, sheer speculation comes up, and those aren't good answers. Speculation is not.
Those were fine answers. I like those answers. My take on it is, first, I don't believe it was the mob in any way, and I'll tell you why. The great Ralph Salerno, when I listened to him, and he had this. I was watching it on that Select Committee on Assassination, and he had this chart. It had all the Gambino crime families, and it was like a tree. It went down, and he said, if Ruby was sent to silence Oswald, then somebody would have been sent to silence Ruby. And then somebody would have been sent to silence the man who silenced Ruby. And then somebody would have been sent to say, he said, it would have just kept going on. And that put that put that in my mind. The Russians, Dave, there's a Dave Peer guy. I can't think of his name. What was I can think of this guy's name? Who's a postman. He's a researcher. Very great. He says he can disprove every one except for one conspiracy. And he says the CIA. And he says same thing that you said, rogue element. Me and Patrick Collins is the one who got me onto this when I really started studying it and got into the Mexico City. If there was a conspiracy, I believe that's where it came out of, was Mexico City, and he was influenced by either anti-Castro Cubans or the Cuban government itself. Because then there's a book, Castro Secrets, and supposedly Castro, from what I've read, Castro already knew Oswald worked at the Texas School Book Depository, and the day of the assassination, he had them turn the radio on to listen to the news.
Well, that could be, I guess, but I don't know. I think the mob is, but again, if Oswald did the shooting, he very well could have been, and it could have been on this whole thing that I said that I do believe there's a conspiracy after John F. Kennedy was killed. It could be that even the United States people in the U.S. government overseeing that desire to suppress evidence or not evidence, but to suppress information that could be evidence, I suppose. Even they might not have known who Oswald was working for. It could have been maybe Oswald was a lone assassin, but it all looks like what these things that you just said and what I've just said, they could have been completely a question mark to them too, but they could have still been, but a lot of people could have drawn these conclusions. We don't know. And that's the enduring thing about this assassination and this study of this subject.
I'm sorry to interrupt you again. Even John McCollum said that there was a benign cover-up.
Yeah, when you don't know, the CIA in 2013,
right.
They admitted to, as they called it, a benign cover-up.
Benign cover-up.
All regarding Cuba, regarding, and but there are people who are hardcore. Oswald did it. Nobody helped him. You know who they are by name. So do I. Some of them. And I respect their point of view, but I really don't think that they do know that. I think that that's a conclusion that they come to with some, basis in fact. But I think, I think that it is not totally proven to me that Oswald and Oswald alone killed JFK. And even if he did, that the post-assassination cover-up to protect national security, to protect the Kennedy administration, to protect Kennedy the man and the Kennedy family, to avoid an official congressional investigation, which didn't happen until the HS. Well, they were a couple before that, I guess, but that's not what the Warren Commission was. They didn't want anybody digging into this, and
they cut off a lot of avenues.
And that's part of the problem that we have now. So it's a multi layered problem of, and it might come down as we started talking about earlier. Okay, well, Oswald did it, but even then, and I haven't concluded that at all, but even then, you could still have that post-assassination cover-up that muddied the water to the point where it can never be unmuddied,
Well, we're going to come back and talk about this later.
Yeah.
And one more quick question for you, and then I'll let you go. Do you think he killed Tippit?
I don't pretend to be as the most well-read person about the Tippit murder. And I think that it certainly looks as if he did from most of the things I've seen. If he didn't, then I would be very surprised. I hate to, not say it yes or no, but I don't know, but I would say probably, yeah.
I've enjoyed this track. I mean, you've given me, usually I've got so many people, hardcore this, hardcore that, but you've given me and open-minded answers. And for the last thing, I'd like to ask you, you're a little bit older than me, but when I came up and it started getting big again in the 80s with Geraldo and Badgeman and showing this stuff. We were, as a kid, I was always led to believe that Oswald was the assassin, but there were others involved. But it seems like over the last 30 years of my life, it has evolved into a thing that Oswald was a complete patsy and 500 different assassins was there, and some Ruby didn't shoot Oswald, somebody else did. Why do you think that this thing has took on a life of its own and has just went so bonkers out there that just defies logic?
Probably three reasons. Number one is because it sells books. Number two, and people like to write and read books. Number two, it's a great discussion topic that you can go on and talk about for hours and hours and never really exhaust the topic. And number three, maybe that is the case. It just, is that confusing that, that we really don't know. And, that level, again, those layers of knowledge, the stratified lack of knowledge and confusion, information, disinformation has created such a mess that, we will never know the absolute truth. And one would think, well, I'll know that when I get to heaven, but will we? I don't know. So I think for reasons both good and bad, but I think a lot of it has to do with people wanting to write and sell books. It's very readable books sometimes too. You can make a lot of money with those, but I don't want to blame it all on book writers, because I think it also is in the discussion, and we can't leave out, although it existed before that, we can't leave out the internet, because the existence of the internet makes everybody able to chime in, whether they know anything or not.
And if it was not for DNA, I would have a book out right now that I was, of course, I'd have to add some age and make myself look older, but I would have a book out right now that I was Lee Harvey Oswald's illegitimate son with, somebody, and I would be telling my story.
Well, you could write the book, and then let it, like the controversy soar and circle, and you could be at the center of the controversy, and then only in the end, you could go on Maury Povich, and he could say, Lee, wherever you are, you're not the father, but whatever.
At that time, I probably sold enough books that I've already made it. When I cut cameras, one thing I want to ask you about. I tell you, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. This has been one of the first, conversations I've had. Your type, you're talking to you online and actually talking to you on in person or on the phone. I get a totally different take on your beliefs on stuff, and it gives me a newfound respect on your opinions on things that you say. So I've really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I've enjoyed it too. And you ask really good, penetrating questions. And all I can say is keep up the good work, because I think that your interviews have really helped people kind of come alive in that same way, that, you get to hear the voices behind the things that are written. So, you're doing good work, man.